Okay, this is Nana with Sew It Seams, and I'm going to be making a child's tote bag. I have cut 4 pieces of fabric. This fabric is going to be the outside of my tote bag. I have pinned my fabric pretty side to pretty side, okay? I have put 2 pins up at the top. This is the top of my bag, and this is to remind me not to sew the top of my bag closed, okay? I have my presser foot lined up with the edge of my fabric, and I'm going to keep it this way because I want the edge of my fabric, I want my presser foot to stay there so my seam allowance will stay even throughout the project. So the way I will do that is by having my presser foot lined up with my fabric, okay? So I've got my machine threaded, and I'm using a dark blue thread in the top because that is going to be what's on top of, that's going to be what shows at the top of my tote bag. In my bobbin thread, I have white. I'm going to hold on to the tails of my thread, and I'm going to carefully take a couple of stitches forward, and then I'm going to go backwards because I want to lock my stitches in, okay? And now I'm going forward again. I have my needle all the way over to the left. On this machine, my needle, you can move it, you can have it in the middle, or you can have it all the way over. I've got mine all the way over because I want a decent size seam allowance. So very carefully, I'm stitching all the way to the end of my first side of my bag. Okay, so I've got my feet, my presser foot, the foot of my presser foot is right at the very end, okay? I am going to turn my needle, so my needle is sunk into my fabric, and then I'm going to pivot, and this is going to take me to the bottom of my bag, okay? And this bag, I am not going to do boxed corners on this bag, okay? This bag is for my grandson. He is about 2.5, and I am not going to box the corners. But notice that I am reinforcing my seams. So I did go backwards so I can lock my stitches in, and I'm going all the way across the bottom of my bag. This is going to be the bottom. If I was going to box my corners, this is where I would do it, but I'm not going to box these corners. Okay, so I went to where my presser foot was at the end. I'm going to make sure my needle is in my fabric. I think I need to take about 1 more stitch, so I'm going to just kind of do that with my hand. Now I sunk my needle in. I'm going to lift my presser foot, keep my needle down, and I'm going to pivot or turn my work. So this is the last side of the outer portion of my bag. So I took a couple stitches forward. I did a couple of stitches back just to kind of reinforce the corner. Okay, I'm keeping my presser foot lined up with the edge of my fabric, and this is what is going to give me a very nice, even seam allowance. You will notice that I scattered pins in my bag, and this is to keep my 2 pieces of fabric, which are for the outer part of the bag. This is to keep them face to face, okay? I don't want them slipping. I want them to stay. And this is meant to be just a very easy tote bag. Okay, so I'm going to go all the way to the top, and I'm going to back up a couple of times and go back, okay, because I want my stitches reinforced. Okay, now I'm going to pull my work out. So this is the outside of my tote bag, and I have already got it sewn. I'm going to keep it pinned for now, okay? I'm going to keep these pieces pinned together just like they are. This is the outer portion of my tote bag. I'm going to set it to the side once I get my little threads. I'm going to trim off my threads, okay? And I did not sew the top of my bag. I sewed the side. I sewed across the bottom. I sewed up the other side. But the top of my bag, where I put the 2 pins to remind me, that is open, okay? You do not want to sew your bag closed. Okay, so now I'm going to take my lining fabric, okay? This is my lining fabric. I'm making it out of quilting cotton. So I'm going to lay my fabric down. I have it face up. Then I'm going to take this piece of fabric and I'm going to put it face down. So they're face to face, okay? And this is going to be the lining of my bag. So I'm going to take my pins and I'm going to start just carefully taking the pins, going through both pieces of fabric, and just pinning them together because I don't want the fabric to shift, okay? And I want to make sure when I'm sewing that I keep my seam allowance even. We want to keep it even just like we did when we were sewing the other part of the bag, the outer part. And I'm also making sure that I don't put my pins near where I'm going to sew. I'm putting quite a few pins in, and I don't want this fabric to shift, but this is a good way for beginners to pin, okay? I could pin right where I'm going to sew and take my pins out as I'm sewing, but that's just one more thing to worry about. I don't want to have to worry about that, okay? So I have my pins all in to where my fabric is not going to shift, okay? Once again, I'm going to come to the top of my tote bag and I'm going to put me 2 little pins. These are different pins. They look like they have a little pearl on the top of them. And I am just going to stick them in the top to remind me not to sew the top of my bag. Okay, now there's something else that I need to do. I'm going to take clips and I'm going to clip them on one side of my bag. And the reason I am doing this is because this lining fabric, I need to leave a place where I can turn. You don't have to do it on the outer, but on the lining fabric, I need to. So I have put some clips, okay? And those clips are reminding me that I do not sew in between the clips, okay? That's very important. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to line up my presser foot just like I did before. It's at the end of my fabric. Going to make sure my thread tails are pulled out because I do not want, make sure they're both pulled out good. I do not want skip stitches. I want my stitches to be even. So when I first start, I'm going to press down and I'm holding my thread tails. Now I'm going backwards. And again, I'm going forward and back one more time because I want this to be strong. Okay, so now I'm sewing all the way. And this is the inside of my bag. This is the lining. So I didn't change my thread. I'm sewing with a navy blue thread, but since this is going to be inside of the bag, this is not going to show. So I didn't bother to change it. Okay, so I'm going all the way to the end to where my presser foot is barely sticking off of my fabric. I have my needle down, I lift my presser foot, and I pivot and put my needle back down, okay? So now I'm sewing the bottom, I'm sorry. Now I'm sewing the bottom. I'm gonna take a couple of stitches and then I'm going to back up a couple of stitches because I want a nice strong corner. Okay, I'm going to go all the way across the bottom of my bag. Now remember, we're going to come to where we need to make sure that we stop where the clips are, okay? So I got to the end and I put my presser foot is down. I made sure my needle's down. I'm going to lift up my foot and I'm going to pivot. And when I pivot, my presser foot again is lined up perfectly with the end of my fabric. So I know I'm in the right place. And I have this red clip which is reminding me that I need to stop right here, okay? So I'm going to take this clip out. I'm going to put my finger here. Let me go back stitch. I want it to be strong. Okay, so I've got my finger here, and I'm going to go all the way. Okay, now I need to back stitch. Go up and go back because this needs to be strong right here because I'm going to be pulling the bag through. Okay, so I have this part done, and now what I need to do is I need to sew this part in front of this pin so this part in the middle is kept open, because that is how we are going to turn our work. Okay, so I'm clipping my threads. And the way I'm going to do this, okay, let's see. I'm going to set up my needle to where my needle is going to be right where that clip was, okay? This is where I need to start. So I'm going to turn my flywheel and sink my needle. I'm going to take a couple of stitches. I'm going to carefully go back a couple, go forward, and go back again. Okay, now I'm going to sew all the way to the top. Get all the way to the top, go backwards, go forward, go backwards and forward. Okay. Okay, so to recap, what we're doing is we're just making a simple child's tote bag, but this is also the same way that you could make a tote bag for an adult. Okay, so just to go over what we've done so far, let me clip my threads. Okay, they're nice and clipped. Okay, all right. So here's what we have. We have an outer bag, which is sewn together, okay? We have an inner lining, which is sewn together, but there is about a 4-inch opening on one of the sides that I am going to keep so the bag can be turned, okay? All right, so here's our next step. So I've got my outer fabric sewed together. Now you can do a couple of things. You can leave it just like it is, okay? Or you can zigzag your seams to finish your seams, or you can cut with pinking shears, okay? Now what I'm going to do, what pinking shears does, is it keeps your fabric from fraying, okay? Now you don't want to cut anywhere that you have stitched, but you want to carefully trim just like this. And I'm just trimming the extra seam allowance. And this will keep my fabric from raveling. So I trim down one side. Now remember, we are not going to box the corners. I do have a tutorial on boxing corners on a tote bag, but I want this one to be very simple, very beginner friendly. And even though this has dinosaurs, I'm making this for Valentine's Day for my grandbaby, and I have him a bunch of little dinosaur toys that I'm going to put in here. Okay, so I've got one more side, and this bag is going to be finished. As far as this part, the outer part will be finished, okay? So carefully, did not cut in any seams, but I went all the way around, and my edges now will not ravel. And I tried to be pretty even. Okay, now I've got my lining fabric, okay? I want to do the same thing. I want to pink the edges of the material so it doesn't ravel. But I want to be careful. This opening that I left on the side, I'm going to keep this extra fabric just like it is, okay? I'm going to trim these edges, the bottom, and up the side, but I'm keeping my opening just like it is. Okay, so here I am trimming the side of my lining that does not have the hole. Okay, I'm just trimming. And remember, as I was sewing, when I would start and stop, I was back stitching to lock in my stitches. Okay, so now I'm trimming across the bottom. When you are sewing a tote bag or anything that you need If it has somewhere like where it's going to be open and closed, or it's the corners, or it's the straps, you want to go back and forth, and we call that back tacking or locking our stitches, because you want them to be reinforced, you want them to be strong. Okay, the only part I have left is the part on the side where I have my where I have the opening. So I've cut the top part. Can you see that? I cut the top part, and now I'm cutting the bottom, but I'm leaving that fabric in the middle where I need to leave it so I can turn, okay? And you need to keep that fabric because we're going to need to tuck that inside. All right, so now here's what I do. Now it's time to take my pins out of my lining and also out of the outer part of my bag, okay? So now I can take it out of the top, because if I look, I can tell where the top is, because the bottom has a stitch line, the top does not. I'm just taking my pins out, sticking them here in my pin cushion. Now for the handles of this tote bag, I'm going to use webbing. When you make a tote bag, you can cut your handles out of material, and then you have to fold the material, and sometimes it's good to use like fusible webbing or batting inside the material where you're making your handles for your tote bags. But something I like to do, especially with a child's tote bag, is I just use webbing. Okay. All right. So here is my outer part of my bag. Now I am not boxing the corners. If we wanted to box the corners, now would be the time to do it. Okay. So what I'm going to do first, I am going to turn my bag the right way. Now, even though I did not box the corners, I did trim with my pinking shears, okay? See, this makes a nice little bag, but it's not a three-dimensional bag. It's just a flat bag. If you want it to be a three-dimensional bag, then you need to box your corners, okay? So this is the outside of my tote bag. Okay, now I'm gonna, I'm not gonna turn this one. I'm not gonna turn it in, okay? I'm not gonna flip it. This is my lining, and what we do is we take our outer part of our bag, okay? And we're gonna put it inside of our lining. I'm gonna put it inside. And what you need to remember here is that when you sew, you want pretty side to pretty side, okay? And that's what we have. The pretty side, my bag, the lining is still inside out. The other part of the bag is the lining's inside out. The outside of the bag was flipped right. So this is my lining fabric, okay? This is I can't think of the word, inside out, okay? But inside, if you look inside, you also see the inside of my outer fabric. But if you look here, you see that the layers are touching, okay? All right, so here is an important part. I want to line these seams up. I want to line my seams up, okay? They're all lined up like they need to be. I'm going to stick my hand in and make sure that my corners are poked out. Okay, we want it nice and flat. And now, here is an important part. Now it's time to work on our handles, okay? All right, so let's see. I think I'm going to use this bright green for my handles. This is webbing. So I need to decide how big I want my handles to be. Let me see. Okay, I don't want them to be very big because this is going to be a child's tote bag, okay? So I think I want them about this big. So let me measure and see. I'm going to go ahead and cut. All right. And I'm going to measure and cut the other handle. We want them to be just the same size. Okay, so I have them both cut. All right, now what I'm going to do, I could take my pinking shears and I could cut the edges so they don't ravel, or I can take a lighter and very carefully, I'm going to melt that. I'm trying to get it to, okay, there we go. Okay, I've got that melted, and what's going to happen is that is not going to fray, okay? We don't want that to fray. This is going to be one of my handles. Okay, so very carefully, I just melted that. And now I'm going to do the other two ends. And this is a lined tote bag. Okay. All right. Now here's an important part of what we're doing. So it's time to put our handles inside, because when we sew around the top of our bag, remember we did not want to close. Hi everybody, thank you for watching. We did not want to close our bag, okay? When we were sewing, we left it open, but now we are going to want to sew around the top of our bag. But before we do that, we need to set our handles the way that they need to go, okay? So I just peel this back and I see my outer fabric and I see my lining. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to put my handles inside. And I don't want them twisted. I want them to be straight. I'm going to let them stick out just a little bit. I'm going to take a clip and I'm going to put the clip right there. So very carefully, making sure that my handle does not get turned. And if you look at the bag, yep, you want the handle to be inside where your outer fabric is, and the lining, see where the lining and the fabric are touching? Well, it's inside of here, and my the top is hanging out, okay? And the rest is just kind of curved. It's not twisted, it's curved. We flip it over. We're going to need to do the same exact thing on the other side with the other handle. So again, we're putting it like this. And we're putting it in our bag. And now it's on the other side. So I'm going to put my clip on, trying to make them even. Got to take a little bit of time to get this lined up the right way. Okay. Yeah, they need to be. So I'm just trying to be careful to make sure that I put the each strap is even. We want one strap on one side So this is the trickiest part when you're first learning how to sew a tote bag. You just want to make sure you can either use pins or you can use clips for your handles. And you make sure that your seams, like the side seams of the bags, are touching. The top of the bag is touching. Okay, so now it's time to sew around the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the table off of my sewing machine because that will make it easier to sew around my bag. Okay. Okay, I want to make sure that you only have the clipping the handle to just one side of the bag. It can't be clipped to both sides. Each one needs to be singly clipped because what we're doing is we're going to be sewing the lining, sewing around the top. We're sewing the lining and the top. We're sewing them to each other, but you don't want to sew the top closed. So you have to keep coming in here and making sure that you only have your clip on your, you just have it clipped on each side, okay? You want to be able to go inside of your bag. And again, you want to try to make sure that your seams are together. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure that I have the top of my bag. My seams are touching, my seams are together. Okay. Now when you start sewing, okay, I'm going to undo my clip, but I'm going to straighten this out. You can put a little pin in here. And you also want to make sure that each one is relatively the same amount space-wise. All right, I'm going to start right here, and then I'm probably going to have to do a little bit of damage control. Let me get a pin. I want to put a pin I'm going to put a pin in here hooking my lining and my top and my strap together so it will stay. Okay, now let me do this to this side. When I'm getting it set up, I like to use my clips, but when I'm ready to sew, it seems a little easier. Make sure you don't have your handle twisted. Let me look in here. Okay. Y'all, this is I'm going to tell you, there is an easier way to do this. You can sew your handles, just sew them to the outside of the bag. That's an easier way, but it doesn't look as professional. It looks more professional if you have your handles, if they come out and they're like hooked into the bag. It just looks more professional than when you have then when you go ahead and just stitch them to the outside and you can see a raw edge. Okay, so this is how I've done it. My two straps, the straps on this side are up, they're pinned. My lining is pinned. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and do that on the other side as well, because it seems like it's easier to sew around it with the pin as opposed to the clip. When I was getting it in the right space, it was nice to have the clip, but now I think hooking it with the pin is going to make it easier. And again, this is a child's tote bag, so you know, this does not have to be perfect. I'm giving this to my grandchild. If I was like selling this bag, I would try to make it, you know, as good as I could. But honestly, my grandbaby, he does not care. He's just going to think it's cool because he's going to have his own little bag, and it's going to be full of dinosaurs and full of cool things that Nana gave him for Valentine's Day. Okay. Let me see. Let me put this in just a little. You want the handles. You want these two together and these two together. You don't want them sewed together, but you want them in the same place on the bag. And y'all, I can only hope that they're not twisted. Did the best I could. Okay, now, here we go. Here's the fun part. Okay, I'm taking my threads. I'm pulling my threads out the back. And the first thing I'm going to do, okay. All right, I want to make sure that I back stitch. And this is like a big circle. I've got my seams together. My presser foot is lined up at the end of my bag. I'm coming to my first strap. So I'm taking my pin out, but I'm keeping my hands here. I don't want that strap to come undone, okay? I want it to stay where it needs to be. So I'm going over the strap. I went over. Now I'm backing up. And I'm going over. And I'm backing up. Okay, so that enforced my strap. Okay. Now let's continue to sew around the top. Okay, I'm coming to my next strap. I'm trying to keep it right where it is. I sewed over my strap. I'm going backwards and I'm sewing over again. Okay, I'm going to do a quality control thing. Before I sew my next two straps on, I'm going to take this out and I'm going to look and make sure that my straps are lined up correctly. It's going to be a little bit easier now because this is secured. All right, let's take a look. All right, we got these two. Let's see. Okay, yep, looks to me like this one needs to be moved a little. Okay, I moved it a little bit. Hopefully that helped. Okay, so because I've started again, I'm going to make sure when I start that I go a couple of stitches forward and that then I go a couple of stitches back. Anytime you start and stop, you need to lock those stitches in, okay? So I'm removing my pin, making sure my seams are still lined up like they need to be. Getting this straight. Oops, almost forgot. Gotta go back a few stitches. There we go. Now that's locked in. Okay. Making sure. Get this together like it needs to be. Lining up my seams. This is my third strap. I'm going over my strap and then I'm going back over front ways and back. Okay, I got one more strap left to do. Going around the top of the bag. This is the most challenging part, going around the top of the bag. And you know that you've kept it like it needs to be if when you go around the bag where you start sewing, when you meet where you started stitching and your stitches are in the same place and they meet nice. That tells you that you did a pretty good job in keeping your seam allowance like it needs to be. Okay, so now we've sewed all the way around the back. All right. Now here's the dangerous part about doing a live sewing tutorial. If I messed anything up, you're going to see it right on camera, but that's okay. All right, so I'm going to cut my threads where I went around. Now remember, let me cut all my threads. Okay, now remember that hole that we left in the side of the bag? Well, this is where we stick our hand in and we're going to start pulling our bag. And we're going to see how Nana did. So I'm turning it the right way. Okay. This is my lining. When you get your bag sewed together, it's going to be like one piece, okay? But then you tuck that lining down into the bag. Now, you see how these straps are sewed into the bag? They're sewed right in the bag. That's the difference. Okay, so I'm gonna stick my hand in here and poke my corners out. I'm gonna stick them in this bag, poke my corners out. Now, if you see that everything's like you want it, now what we need to do, this part of the bag where we left our hole for turning, now we have to sew that shut, okay? But if you did what I told you and you left your edges like you needed to, you just put your fingers in and it just kind of, when you put your fingers in the hole, it will kind of just go exactly like you need it to go. And then the only thing you do, we call this an edge stitch. You come up to the sewing machine and you get as close to the edge of your bag as you can. This is going to be inside. Nobody's ever going to see this. Again, I'm going to back up when I start, but I'm stitching that hole closed. And it's only about 4 little inches. We're stitching that closed. All right, let's see if I got the whole thing. Yep, I got the whole thing. Okay, so that is closed. So we have to trim where we sewed the little hole shut. And now you could take an iron and you could iron this. But what I'm going to do is I am just going to tuck my lining into the bag. Let's tuck the lining in. Just push it in with our fingers and our hands. Just pushing it right in. Okay, so here's my tote bag. We have the tote bag, and this is a child's tote bag, and we've got our little handles. Now there's one more step, actually 2 more steps that I can do. I can take the iron and iron everything nice and crisp, and I can take up here and I can do a top stitch all around the top of my bag. Now, if I do a top stitch around the top of my bag, what that will do is make sure that my nice lining stays in like it needs to, okay? And if I want to, I can take a snap. I can put a snap on my bag. I could put a button on my bag, or I could put Velcro on my bag, okay? So I'm going to stop right here and just know that the last part is ironing, and you can do a very small top stitch all the way around the top. You don't have to, but you can, and that'll keep your lining in your bag, okay? So this has been an easy lined children's tote bag. And please like and follow for more. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. And also, we're having a Valentine's giveaway. So make sure you watch my Valentine video, and it will tell you how you can enter to win the Valentine's giveaway. The drawing will be on February 14th. And this has been Nana with So It Seems. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Please like and share.